Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us for Restoring Respect through Restorative Justice. I'm Marty Washington with NCAL, the National Clearinghouse on Abuse in Later Life. Before we get started, I want to thank the Office on Victims of Crime for sponsoring not only this presentation, but also for your projects, and remind you that any thoughts, observations, comments you hear today are those of the author and not necessarily reflective of the Office of Victims of Crime, Office of Justice programs. Some housekeeping. You all have been here before, so you know, rename your square so we know who you are. And please stay on mute unless you're speaking so we can cut down on background noise. If you have any questions, you can put them in the chat or raise your hand, whatever works for you. And any technical issues, please email me at mwashington@ncall.us. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our speakers today. We are thrilled to welcome Dr. Jacque Gray and Dr. Wendelin Hume. Turn it over to you, Dr. Hume, or Dr. Gray first, right?
Yeah. Yes. Thank you, Marty. I'm Dr. Jacque Gray. I am a grandmother, a great-grandmother, a mother, and a sister. I am also a counseling psychologist by training and was the former director of the National Indigenous Elder Justice Initiative at the University of North Dakota before I retired. Now I'm unretired and working in a number of capacities, providing consultation in working with American Indian tribes, Alaskan villages, and Hawaiian homesteads. Wendelin, I will pass it off to you, Dr. Hume.
Okay, thank you. Hello, I'm Dr. Wendelin Hume. I met Jacque and worked with her for a number of years at UND. So it's a really great pleasure to be able to present with her today on a topic that we're both passionate and involved with. I myself now am director of the National Indigenous Justice Information and Inclusion Working Group. So I am an educator and a researcher here at the University of North Dakota in Grand Forks, North Dakota, for a number of years. And it's a pleasure to be able to share information with you today. We were asked to put together a couple learning objectives. So as you can see, we're hoping as we cover this information, you'll see that it is an approach. Restorative justice is an approach that is very flexible and adaptable. So there's not going to be one set recipe or ways of dealing with this. So you'll be able, however, to identify a few different definitions, yet at the same time, a few key components. You know, what is it that makes restorative justice? Even though there's different models, what do they have in common? We also want to describe a few methods, how to develop one. If you or your area is interested in doing so, we want to give you a few first steps or ideas with that. If you already have one, maybe a few suggestions how you can sustain it. You don't want to develop something and then just have it go away a year or so later. You'd like to keep that going. And sometimes it's helpful to wrap your head around ideas by seeing examples or hearing about examples. So we're going to provide you with a few examples today as well. So first, a couple of the key concepts, no matter which form of restorative justice you're thinking about or trying to adapt. Some things that they have in common, first and foremost, is that as the words imply, restorative justice, there's really an emphasis on this approach being non-adversarial. The dominant justice system is often about catching people, placing blame on a single individual, and then punishing them in some way, usually by sending them away somewhere. That is a Western way of thinking about this, but Restorative justice, actually, some of its tenets come from traditional tribal processes. A lot of people think it was developed out east to work in school systems, but initially, the original ideas were indigenous ideas. And those are the ideas of working together as a community to try to restore situations that are out of balance. So that leads us to the second. We need to acknowledge the harm that's been done to a victim, to a family, to a community. And that way we can then begin to think about what do we need to do to try to repair that harm. Notice the difference isn't how do we punish a person? The difference is how can we acknowledge the harm and then work at repairing that using consensus, right? Not voting, not one person in power, not who wears a badge necessarily, but all working together as a group to see what we can do to try to repair that harm using a consensus approach. And I think that this is particularly relevant if we're thinking about multidisciplinary teams or enhanced multidisciplinary teams, because this approach brings together a wide and ever-changing group of key stakeholders, depending on the situation, depending on the crime, depending on the severity, depending on a lot of things, right? We try to involve those key stakeholders, including the victim and including the offender typically, and then including a lot of other community members, family members, available service providers, whatever it might be, trying to all come together to decide what are the sanctions, what are the services, what is it that we need to do. And as a keynote, since we are having an emphasis on indigeneity, I did want to point out that often elders, at least in indigenous communities, and I actually find in a lot of other communities as well, they don't necessarily respond to that word victim. They may not self-identify as a victim. They don't want to admit they're a victim. That word victim seems, I don't know, it brings weakness or something perhaps in their eyes. So they might see themselves as being harmed. They might see themselves as being taken advantage of or other kinds of words, but they don't always respond to that key word of victim. But we know what that word means. So yes, we want to involve that person that is being harmed as well. Now, as we look at this, I did want to briefly mention kind of shifting our focus a little bit, because to really embrace the concept of restorative justice, you do need to perhaps look at this situation a little differently than maybe you're used to. The typical Western idea of identifying the one wrongdoer and punishing them, we've already mentioned, this is a little different, but that difference, I think, goes deeper. As you're trying to put together a restorative justice program, some key things to keep in mind, particularly if you're working with Indigenous communities or many other minority communities as well. Time, for instance, is something that's seen as much more fluid. Be prepared when you have a starting time. You might need to be a little flexible about that. As you're setting up a time for meetings, they may take longer. You don't end things in the middle of a discussion. You need to be a little bit more flexible about that. Typically, we want to be sure, especially if you're working with elders, that we show them respect. Due to their age, they have accumulated a lifetime of wisdom. And so we want to kind of treat them in a manner of respect. We were talking before we started about, starting a meeting correctly, making sure that we take the time, for instance, to involve perhaps extended family. Keep in mind, in many Indigenous and other minority communities, family isn't just the immediate nuclear family like you might see in other situations. Family is cousins and aunties and uncles. And keep in mind, some of those people we call aunts or uncles they're not actually related to us, but they've been involved with our family. They've been part of seeing the children grow up. They've had a hand in things for a number of years. We treat them like family. And so if we're involving people in the process that may have been impacted by the crime or that may be there to support a victim, you have to take kind of a broader view when we use that word family of who that might include. We are seen in kind of a spiritual outlook. The natural environment is very important, sometimes as a setting, sometimes as a way of relieving stress, but definitely with that idea of all things trying to be in balance. With restorative justice, we're trying to put things back into balance. How can we use the people and use our team to help put things back into balance? And so, yes, traditionally, many members in tribal communities view themselves not as individuals. They don't take pride as an individual. What we take pride in is the group we're a part of, the tribe we're a part of, whatever that might be. And so, as we do a restorative justice situation, involving those other people from the community, from that bigger group, can really help the victim find some healing and perhaps some closure through this process. There's also definitely an emphasis on giving, often a giving of prayers, a giving of thanks, maybe even a giving of a token or a gift, right? That's quite common. And out of a sign of respect, it's kind of expected that might be done back. So that's kind of a unique thing about the culture that if you can pick up on that, it helps build trust quite quickly and makes the restorative justice process go more smoothly. Spirituality can be a big part of the restorative justice process, since it is a big part of the tradition. And talking. History has been oral traditionally. Many of the teachings are passed down orally traditionally. And so when you come into a restorative justice context, do expect that there will be a strong use of talking and communication as we work together and sort things out and try to come to the best conclusion. So here are some things if you're thinking about this other restorative justice way versus the traditional justice process. Let's be honest, there may be some costs. You're going to need facilitators. If you yourself are doing everything on your own shoulders, you're going out in the community, you're going to bring these groups together. That takes some skill, right? Not everybody can do this. So a good trained facilitator, their skills can be quite significant to the success of a program. And if they're not already volunteering or somehow involved in your group, you may in fact need to hire someone. So there would be that cost. But a good facilitator is really key to helping this process go well. You might need to offer some education to the traditional members of our justice system that would now be involved in this new restorative justice practice, because they're going to kind of need to switch hats a little bit, whether that's judges, prosecutors, whoever might be in your enhanced multidisciplinary team. It's not enough that you yourself, oh, I understand restorative justice. They need to understand the concept so that they can get behind it and be involved with it as well. Now, there's not a universal template. That's, to me, I view that as kind of a strength. It means you can modify it for the situation, for the community, for the members of your team that you're bringing to bear to this. I list it, however, as a potential consideration or weakness, because a lot of people just say, well, hand me the recipe or give me the 5 steps and I'll do it. And instead we have to say, well, it depends, right? That's a strength, but it's also potentially a difficulty, right? We also need to understand that this process, um, getting everybody involved, giving them time to speak, trying to come back, make changes, revisit those changes. Is that working? Do we need to do something different? It's an ongoing kind of process oftentimes that can take days. It can continue for months. In some instances, it may be something you revisit every occasionally because this whole process will actually take a matter of years to come to conclusion. Um, Most people like it short and simple and packaged, and that is not what restorative justice is. It's also not neat. Unlike a courtroom, everybody stay silent, everybody stay in your seat, rise for the judge, then sit, and we're all very quiet. This is bringing forward actual raw emotions. There's a lot of talking, there's crying, there's some strong remorse sometimes on behalf of the offender. It's not just all the emotions of the victim, it's family members, community members. It can be very touching, but also very raw, very real. And you need to be prepared for that. This is not neat and easy. This is real but useful, right? This technique, if done well and done correctly, can help many individuals, the victim, the offender, family members, the support team, really bring people to a point of personal empowerment. You feel like you're actually making a difference. And that victim can feel like they're actually regaining control over their own life. It can be a very powerful solution because when you regain that feeling of control, you take giant step forward in your healing. And ultimately, not immediately, but ultimately through healing, hopefully we can bring closure to everybody involved. It just kind of humanizes this process for everyone. So here's like a little module to kind of look at it. So we would have that initial injury usually comes to our attention once an individual, the victim, a family member for that victim, someone brings it to our attention and we're reaching that decision. Yes, we need to do something about it. That's the first step towards healing. Then we do this work of mediation, of restorative justice, coming together, putting the plans in place, walking through those plans can take quite some time, but eventually that does lead to healing for the victim, for the offender, for the family members, for the community sometimes, and bringing closure to this event and prevention, hopefully, of other events. Humanizes it. So before I pass this off to Jackie here in a slide or two, I did want to share some key information just as background. When we refer to American Indian or Alaska Native individuals, depends on which census numbers you're looking at, but let's round it and say roughly 5.7 million throughout our country. Many of the individuals don't necessarily live on tribal lands in a reservation. They're mixed in your community. They can go to school, they can live anywhere, right? So they're often in communities where you might not expect them. I've seen, especially out east, people will say, but we don't have a tribe here. That does not mean you don't have tribal members there. So something to keep in mind. We have 574, I believe, federally recognized tribes. The number for those that consider themselves American Indian or Alaska Native, they just haven't been federally recognized yet, is greater. We were just discussing before we got started how some areas, they're starting to get recognized. So there are more that are in that process. Maybe the state recognizes them, but perhaps the federal government doesn't. Obviously, we don't want to exclude them. We would want to include them. Often bringing things forward and dealing with them is easier if we do have some laws, or in our case, tribal elder codes. Think of those as laws in place. In tribal communities, not all tribal communities have a specific tribal elder code. Our guesstimate is about 100 that we're aware of do, but that's less than a fifth then, right, of all the tribes that are out there. Also keep in mind that when we use the word elderly in tribal communities, that's just someone that has managed, despite all the hurdles that have been thrown in their way, they're getting older, right? So tribes define this differently. Often, if you've reached the age of 55, you're doing good, because unfortunately, the life expectancy in tribal communities is less. So 55, some will say 60. That's usually where you'll find it. Keep in mind the federal government and others have a different definition, but from a tribal perspective, that's old right there, 55, right? We use the word elder with a capital E a little bit differently than you might see in other situations. When we say someone is older or elderly, that's one thing. To be an elder is actually a very specific honor that is given either by role, by clan, or by being identified, just that they have lived their life in such a way by providing guidance and wisdom and just showing us through their words and actions, they have earned and deserve our respect. Those are the individuals that we refer to as elder with a capital E, right? So it's a little bit different using the word that you're elderly versus an elder. Just keep in mind there's that little distinction, but it can be an important one. All right, a couple of cultural issues that I did want to mention. We do have a cultural sensitivity curriculum that we're working on uploading on, I mentioned I'm the director of NIJII.org, the National Institute for Justice and Information Inclusion for Indigenous Justice. So we do have some information up there if you want to go take a look at that later. Information about historical trauma, which can be important to keep in mind as you're putting together restorative justice and working with tribal individuals. Childhood experiences that are adverse, witnessing abuse, being abused, those types of things. ACEs, you're probably familiar with those. We use that in our culture as well. Keep in mind that for many tribal communities, we're also seeing lower socioeconomic status, higher rates of poverty, unemployment, lower health outcomes, lessened standards of living, those types of things. So you need to keep that in mind as you work with those individuals. And I did want to mention, and we had said something about this just before we started, use of land acknowledgement statements. If you're going to do one of those as you do a get together for restorative justice or other purposes, you know, please just make sure that your thoughts and heart are in it. It's not just this thing you ramble off like it means nothing, because then that actually can come off more insulting than having said nothing at all. Done well, it's useful. Done poorly, it's hurtful. So just something to keep in mind. All right. Finally, my last slide, I believe, before I turn it over to Jackie, is a couple of other unique things. When dealing with cultural individuals, often the word abuse doesn't ring a bell. Use words like disrespect. Oh, they understand what disrespect, being disrespected is. It means the same thing, but the language is a little bit different. Also, if you talk about sexual abuse, that often is something that they're not going to respond to. But if you say and use the word bothering, means sexual abuse. So when trying to get together, especially with an Indigenous victim, to talk about should we set up a restorative justice situation, offer them something to eat, maybe a beverage, you know, take your time, bring this up, get them talking with broad statements like, are you being disrespected? Would you tell me who's disrespecting you and how? Has anyone bothered you? Would you tell me how? That can get the conversation going in places where having a more traditional approach might not. Finally, in terms of something I wanted to share around spiritual abuse, is another thing that you might see when working with Indigenous people. It was actually Jacque Gray herself, I'm borrowing this definition from her, defined as a harmful interference with spiritual growth, including the corruption of another person's value system. We see more spirituality rather than organized religion sometimes in some cultural communities. So we want to make sure that we pay attention to that, as well as something a victim may be experiencing. If you're preventing an elder that usually goes to ceremonies, that goes and joins in with spiritual activities, and you're shutting them in their home, not giving them rides, not allowing them to attend, that can be very spiritually hurtful. And that's seen as a form of abuse. Taking their sacred traditional ceremonial items, traditionally to even touch those without permission is wrong. To move them is definitely wrong. To take them and sell them for money is very wrong. And it's not just the same thing as like taking my pen or something and selling it. I mean, this is deeply spiritual. Those are items you can't ever get back. So we need to keep in mind as a unique form of abuse we sometimes see in tribal communities that you might not think about in other more traditional settings. Keep in mind, some people will, often non-tribal people, will offer to do like a cleansing or a sweat or a something in the guise of, oh, it's so spiritual. And sometimes we've seen these outsiders using that guise not only to make money and misappropriate the culture, but then in that influence, they will grope. Sometimes they do sexual assaults. They do other things and claim, oh, we need to do this for your healing. How preposterous. That is not about healing at all. So it doesn't happen often, but just to raise your awareness that sometimes it does. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jacque.
Thank you, Wendelin. And it's good to be with all of you. And I hope that some of these examples that I'm going to talk about will give you some ideas of some of the varieties of restorative justice programs that you might be able to implement. First of all, in Indian country, instead of MDTs or multidisciplinary teams, we call them elder protection teams. And the focus is on protecting the elder, not all the different people you bring to the table. And the important part of that is that the elder is in attendance and they are a part of that decision-making process. Another type are the family circles. These may be where you gather the family members or all those that are involved. As much as Wendelin has described, you know, they have those mediations to try to find the best way for respected and honored from our perspective. And also from the elder's perspective, that's the one that's most important. Many times it'll be like a family, well, like the family restoration programs. Those family circles are where you bring together the family, you talk about what's going on, we talk about how can we make this work in a better way. And, you know, maybe the elder says, I want my nephew to quit drinking. My nephew's supposed to take care of me and I can't have him, you know, drinking when he's doing that. Well, maybe a part of that discussion is that nephew willing to go to treatment? And how do you bring in the resources and find ways to help that happen so that if that they get the treatment and they're able to come back and in a sober way take care of that elder in the future. And who's going to help to do that care of the elder in the meantime, and discussing those types of things, and how can the family come together and how can that relationship be healed. And it may be something that, as was described earlier, you'll have a meeting and you'll come up with, okay, this is our treatment plan, or these are the things that we feel like needs to happen. And then maybe someone will come and check in on it in a month or in a couple of weeks and see how that's progressing. And then you go on until that family has made the progress that they need to begin to do that healing and that restoring of balance in the relationship. Pardon me. Among other tribes, they have elder councils. The thing that's interesting about the elder councils is when something has happened and people are brought before the elder council, then the elder council does the teaching. If it's the person that's not showing respect and care to that older adult, that the elder council teaches that person that's supposed to be providing that care what the tribe expects and what, historically their role was to be and how that was to be carried out and things like that. And then continuing to how the things should be going forward in the future. First of all, they are teaching or remediating that process so that the individual knows what their responsibilities are. Then they also let that person know that going forward, the whole community is watching you. And now the community also knows that you know what to do it to be in a good way. And then, what the result will be if you continue to act in a disrespectful way. And really, the purpose is to do the teaching and that remediation of someone that hadn't been taught how they were to behave. That's the assumption, not that they don't want to, but they haven't been taught. So then they're taught, and then if they continue to make the choice to disrespect, then there may be more harsh consequences for those behaviors. And then I'll talk a little more in a few slides about the community policing. But many of these types of programs may carry like a deferred prosecution if you're within the justice system. So it may be a deferred prosecution or a deferred sentencing, where you may need, like with the family restoration, and somebody needs to go to substance use treatment. It may be that you need to have not only the carrot, but the stick to say, if you do not go to treatment, here's what the result will be. And this is where that sentencing will kick in, or where the prosecution will kick in. And utilizing that flexibility can be very helpful, which, kind of pulls both the justice system and the cultural system of restored justice together. And then sentencing circles, again, if something has had to go on to court, then bringing not only the elder, but also family and all together to really confront. And we see this with the victim impact statements, but to confront what has happened and what needs to happen, but how that person can earn their way back into the family system or that center with that sentencing circle. Next slide, please. As I said, the elder protection team, maybe I was just supposed to read off what all those were, but it not only does it involve, well, let me start first. Each one may be different, and working in tribal and rural communities, every community has different resources. Some have more than others. Sometimes you have to bring in special resources, like with your enhanced teams, but you have to learn to work with what you have and where to find what you don't have. And part of it, the responsibility in protecting the elders or educating the community and doing prevention activities. Part of it, you're building cooperation and trust with those professionals, the elders and their families, because you're bringing people together and educating them. And some people said, I never knew I was being abused until someone came out and presented on this. Providing an empathetic listener, someone to hear their stories, and then to take those stories and say, now, is this something that is abusive or not? Is this something we need to intervene with or not? That implementing that effective method for responding to the, you maintain confidentiality. And initially, one of the biggest problems that the teams had, because in Indian country, everybody knows everything. I think we find that true in rural communities as well. But that confidentiality and how important it is for those that are a part of the team. And I know in some of the earlier teams that they had to really crack down on this by firing people for violations of confidentiality in order to get across that we're very serious about this. And they haven't had another problem since. I think back to when my kids were little and I used to say, be in the car when I'm ready to go, or I'll leave you. And all I had to do was pull out of the driveway and go around the block and come back once, and it never happened again. Well, a lot of times that's the way it has to happen in our communities. We have to make believers that we're not just bluffing. Reporting that suspected abuse or neglect, and then intervening when it's necessary. And that intervention can be a matter of bringing in services. It can be a matter of, like a deferred prosecution or deferred sentencing, or a whole myriad of other possibilities. And many times the elder that's involved may have a solution that they recommend that works better than anything you could come up with. And what we want to do is restore that respect and that dignity of our elders. And the family circles and restoration, again, a social worker or mediator usually ends up meeting with the family members and the caregiver, if that's the person that needs to be involved. It's used as part of diversion programs. And as I mentioned, the treatment plan and then the variation of the meetings and things like that can make a difference. So next slide, please. The sentencing circles, as I said, the elder protection team or multidisciplinary team, depending on what you call it and how it looks at things. We're wanting more positive outcomes for everyone involved. And we want to identify ways other than incarceration to change the relationship. I think we find over and over that incarceration really doesn't work. So we want to try to find more positive ways to make that happen. And we want to be able to recognize that disrespect. Again, the elder. Go ahead. The elder council is more traditional. And they teach the offender from the culture. They address how elders are to be treated. They determine what they have to do to restore the relationship, and that the community is going to be watching. And then continued violation may result in traditional consequences. They may be banned. They may be, sent away from the tribe and they can't come back. Those are very severe consequences, to be totally cut off from your family. Next slide, please. And I said I'd talk more about the community policing. Operation Golden Shield was an effort between the Office of Justice Services, the law enforcement, and I think it may have some automatic advances in there hidden on those slides. These were slides that were shared, and the Anadarko social services work together. Okay, so this is a way to combat elder abuse and neglect and ensure the safety of the vulnerable adults. So the former police chief, Rick Decora, proposed that his officers make random friendly visits with vulnerable adults that are within or outside the territorial jurisdiction of the Anadarko agency. So they're covering 5 counties now. At first, they identified 27 vulnerable adults, that the names they got from social services. And then every shift, the officers would take a few names. And next slide. The friendly visits, they started in August of 2012, and it's still in full operation. They take the names and they make a friendly visit to those elders, and they go and enjoy visiting with them. Some of the things that happen, and if you can hold it there, however that has to happen. Some of the things that they would do, to stop by, people are seeing more of a police presence around those elders. The elder is less scared of the police and see them as a help. Maybe they'll change a light bulb. Maybe they'll just stop by for a cup of coffee or something like that. The elders look forward to these visits. And the other side of it is people see that the police are paying more attention to this elder. I'm going to go find some other mark that isn't as well connected as this particular one is. They found that over time, the criminal activity around physical, emotional, psychological, or financial exploitation, that they can pick up on those things. The elder's more likely to tell them about it. And then they can involve the appropriate social services to do assessments. BIA, Bureau of Indian Affairs, which is the police, will take whatever steps they think are appropriate to take care of the health, safety, and financial well-being of the vulnerable adults. And in one case, they very likely saved $45,000 of one of those elders' money by being able to intervene before it could have been taken. Next slide, please. Another thing they developed, but one of their officers saw a need, because many times when there's, an emergency or something, I know as I get older, it's hard to remember everything. I took a fall and I didn't, I was thinking, who can I get hold of to help me in the middle of the night? And I couldn't think, I couldn't get through to anyone I thought I could call. I didn't ever think of calling an ambulance, so I drove myself to the hospital. You know, sometimes we don't think so clearly, but what they did was, if you go back, they developed these magnets that had, you know, the phone number that they were calling from.
Jackie, you're muted. We lost your sound.
No, I don't know what
There you go.
happened.
You're back on.
Okay. Oh, my internet's unstable. Okay, I'm gonna click off my camera. All right, and then, you know, what's happening. So, and it also has some phone numbers on there for social services and non-emergencies. But by having this information that's on a magnet that they have on the refrigerator, when they're on the phone, they can just read that off and not have to remember any of it. That's what I wanted to emphasize. You know, it helps to take one thing off that might delay getting them the response they need. All right. The next slides are some of the pictures of the Operation Golden Shield, that they also prepare a Thanksgiving dinner and deliver it to the elders that they've been visiting. And all the officers and social service workers come in and prepare the dinner. All of this does not involve any money out of Department of Justice, Bureau of Indian Affairs, any of that. It's all out of pocket. They donate their time, they donate the food. And since then, they've gotten donations from the tribes and other places that to help pay for all of this. That talk about sustainability. This is a community involved program. All right, next slide. So you can see they're putting the gloves on, they're preparing the little boxes with the meals, and then they take them out and deliver food and the meals to the elders. Then at Christmas time, they have their senior angels, and they'll take them each a little gift. And so they get a Christmas gift and a visit from some of the officers and social workers. Next slide, please. And then on Valentine's Day, they get their senior sweethearts. And they'll take them another little gift at Valentine's. So, you know, it's nothing big, but it means a lot to those elders that are probably living alone or don't have a lot of interaction. And it helps to also, you know, develop that relationship so they are feeling like they're making a difference. And again, BIA or Office of Justice Services have not allocated any funds to finance these projects. It's all funded through donations from Anadarko Agency, Southern Plains Regional Bureau of Indian Affairs employees, local attorneys, tribal social service programs, Oklahoma Indian Bar Association, tribal gaming commissions, and other places that are donating the things and helping to keep it going. So thank you. And we're ready now. I think we have a few minutes for questions.
Thank you so much. We did have a couple of questions submitted, which I'm thinking that you covered already, but if there was a question about how does it look like with crimes within the family, and you had talked about family circles. And I just wondered if the person who asked that question is on the call, did that answer what you were looking for? Or do we need more information on that? I don't know who asked the question, so I don't know if they're on the call. Anyway, can you speak a little bit about that?
I
As
would
far as-
probably mention,
Go ahead.
in terms of family, one of the things we found is that if you have a restorative justice program available, often people are more willing to come forward or utilize those services because you might have, like, say, a grandparent, their grandchild is helping care for them, but they're also taking some of the money out of their wallet. They don't want to turn them over to law enforcement or see them go to prison. So they'll just take the abuse rather than report it. But if you can give them other options, oh, they would like that theft to stop, but they just don't want to be responsible for tearing the family apart. You give them other options, they'll work with you.
I think another thing that needs to be taken into consideration, especially around financial exploitation within families, is many times within Native families, you've got a multi-generational home. And it may look like the family is living off the elder's income. And yes, they are, but other family members contribute to the well-being of the family in other ways. Somebody may be cooking, somebody may be helping to care for the elder. There'd be transportation, a lot of other types of things that the elder needs, but they have the only income source. The other thing is, in a lot of our tribal communities, I think there are only, it's either 17 or 19 nursing homes in tribal communities in the country. And we're talking 574 federally recognized tribes. That's not a lot. That means they're going to have to be put somewhere a long way from home. And they're basically see it as being sent away to die if they have to go to a nursing home. So finding ways that they can, you know, be able to utilize within the community and rebuild those relationships is so much better.
Thank you. Does anyone else have a question? I have a quick question.
Okay.
In the newsletter blurb that you wrote that was sent out, there was mention of a tribal elder protection team toolkit. Could you tell us a little bit about that document? And I will be sending the link in a follow-up email to everyone here.
Okay. Wendelin, do you want to talk about that, or?
Sure. So on the Najee, which is Anishinaabe for friend, so on our Najee.org website, we took some information that Jackie and others had previously been working on, and we're updating and working on it as well. So it becomes a toolkit where there are some fact sheets, there's pieces of information, kind of step by step to guide people if you're interested in putting that together, what that might look like, what you might need, and some concrete steps you can take. And it's all available on there for free.
And really it talks about, you know, the difference in an elder protection team versus a multidisciplinary team. And I've talked a lot with Laura Mosqueda about this, and we were talking about the elder protection team versus the patient-centered multidisciplinary team. And so we were wanting to kind of write something up and get it out there on that, because there's a lot of similarities that way, but it's how you look at it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And thank you for dropping the link in the chat. Also in the chat is a link to the feedback survey that we put out after every webinar. And I encourage you to click on that and fill it out. We do appreciate any feedback you can give us.
Other questions? You all have our contact information, so you can get hold of us if you have questions later. Good. Glad to hear it. Because I know I always think of questions when it's too late.
Later.
Lisa, did you have something to add?
You're muted, Lisa.
I was trying to do a clap thing.
Oh,
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, you've given us a lot to think about. There's so many aspects to working with the individuals that come on our radar, and this is one more aspect. So thank you so much for that.
And we wanted to give you a variety of examples so that you can understand the flexibility. It's not like your community has to do everything, but even adding one in can help to give another option for your clients.
Mhm. Any final thoughts from anyone, or final comments or questions? Oh, go ahead, Trina. Did you just come up?
I enjoyed this one. It was very informational, and yeah, I like how you put everything together. I liked it. Thank you.
Thank you, Trina. A question? Or are you just thinking about all of it now?
I'm just thinking about it. I have no questions.
Okay.
Thank you for your comment. Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us today, and have a wonderful rest of your day.